Welcome to First Strike here on VSiN. I'm your host, Dave Ross, here in Circus Sportsbook in fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. For the next hour, going to break down UFC 287. Should be a wild night. The UFC took a week off, but they are back with a big-time pay-per-view. Of course, we've got the Middleweight Championship of the World on the line. Once again, Israel Adesanya trying to regain his crown that he lost to his nemesis, Alex Pereira. We're going to talk all about that with Lou Finocchiaro, Jordan Sherwood, Dan Vreeland, and Reed Kuhn. But there were rather large tentacles in the sport of UFC that happened during the off week, if you will, and that was announced that Endeavor, the parent company for UFC and WWE, they are now merged. They are under the same banner. So it'll be very interesting to see what this means for the UFC, specifically for us as we cover and love to gamble on the sport. Let's bring in the aforementioned Lou Finocchiaro right now. You can follow Lou as I do at GamBlue. He's the host of the About Business podcast. And Lou, when you heard that news this week, I got a lot of texts and tweets about it. Like, whoa, what do you make of this? I'll ask you that question, my friend. What do you make of the merger here with WWE and the UFC under Endeavor?
Well, first of all, Dave, thanks for letting me come on. This is an ongoing development. But really, what it appears to me is that a natural ownership is bringing in another business or entity that acts, thrives, and reacts just like the one they have, the UFC. There are subtle nuances and difference that I think that they will borrow from each other to make together the new entity a streamlined affair. It's simply a business move. I think there's a reason that it makes sense for all parties. As far as the integrity of our gamble, which is what we concern ourselves with, first of all, we have to understand that this Endeavor is an entertainment company. We've already seen things that happen, and I'm not saying there's any prescription like there is in this wrestling that I don't watch and don't understand and don't pretend to understand. But I'm not saying there's anything scripted. However, we'd be foolish to not have to understand that there's going to be some evolution of something that's going to creep into the handicap. And right now we call it maybe favorable matchups. You go to England, the English fighters, the Scottish fighters get favorable matchups. For instance, in the card upcoming, we'll start talking about, there's a 19-year-old kid named Rosas who has one UFC fight, and he's on the main card. Well, the UFC has ambitions for him. He's on the main card for a reason. And so is that potentially a favorable fight? Potentially. But somehow they think that this Roses can strike lightning in the form of rear ends and seats and eyeballs watching their production, that they're giving him this spot ahead of a fight like Gastelum and Curtis. And so you got to scratch your head, and we have to see this is going to happen. What is the plan? What's the agenda? Surely Rosas has a favorable matchup here. And while that's not scripted, I've just laid out a situation where Rosas in the main event on a big production is set up to look pretty good.
Minus 225 for Raul Rosas Jr. here against Christian Rodriguez. Excellent point. Well said, Lou. And I guess that's what we're getting at here. People on First Strike, think about why some of these matchups are made. And again, not scripted, but certainly, as they use in wrestling parlance, to get over. Maybe they want Raul Rosas Jr. to get over on the public, so you start to know who this guy is. So maybe the price tag right now, you look at it and go, wow, I'm going to lay over $2. I think Lou just gave you some fuel for the fire there as to why that price tag might be where it is. Let's get to the main event. And, you know, it is a fascinating one again, because if Israel Adesanya wants to be and goes down as the greatest middleweight of all time, he's got to beat Alex Pereira at some point. Right, we've seen this number trickle down here in the last 2 weeks. You could have gotten Pereira as high as plus $1.30, plus $1.25. Now at DraftKings, it stands here on a Tuesday, Lou. It's plus $1.15. What do you make of this? You never really see a short price like this on the quote-unquote greatest middleweight of all time in Israel Adesanya. What do you make of this matchup once again?
Well, I'm really looking forward to it, first of all. And in the first matchup, we had a similar total, 4.5. It was shaded a little to the over. Now it's shaded a little to the under. And in this matchup now, we're catching Israel that opened minus 150 or 60. Now he's down to 135. In the first matchup, he opened 200, closed 210. So what all that means to me is that we're lucky enough to have some body of work. And as I assess this fight, Israel Adesanya won 3.5 of 4.5 rounds in the first fight. But what needed to happen was Pereira needed to finish him, and he got it done. And so now we move forward into this fight. And the only way that I can look at it is somewhat clinical. Yes, Pereira is a dynamic striker, profuse power, a guy that I don't believe has any business fighting at 185, but he can make the weight. Now, all that being said, it's Adesanya that's the more deft mixed martial artist. There was some wrestling in the first fight. There was some top control by Adesanya. I don't put it past his gym to maybe introduce some looks like that. I believe Adesanya is capable of wrestling. I believe this fight comes down to who's the better mixed martial artist as opposed to who's the better kickboxer. And to me, when I assess everything, I'm looking at Adesanya, who in the first fight you had to pay 2-1 for. Now you can get him minus $1.35. I think I'll just watch this line, see how low it goes. But I'm interested in Adesanya in this fight. I believe that he has what it takes to find himself either with a finish or a decision. I don't know which way, but I do like Adesanya.
And that's fascinating because, again, you mentioned it 4.5 here for the total. It's even money right now if you want to take the over 4.5, but it is juiced to the under minus $1.30, with the theory being kind of what you laid out, Lou, that Pereira can't win on points, and it might be tougher for Izzy to get a stoppage, but he's talked the talk leading up to this saying, hey, it's going to be a night of violence. Somebody's going to get hurt. It's not going to be me. If you like Izzy to get a stoppage, you can get 3-1 on KO, TK, or DQ, 16-1 the long shot there at the sub, whereas the shorter price there for Pereira is 2-1 almost, 2 plus 205 for the KO, TKO. If it goes to the cards, Pereira can't win a decision, right?
Oh, I'm not. What if he gets 4 or 5? Now, we never know how these things are really
right.
going to go. And I'm playing devil's advocate to an extent, Dave, because you're right. I mean, this thing figures that if it goes to a decision, it's probably Adesanya in what looked to be the fight we just saw in November, only he gets to finish it. Now, Usman couldn't get that done with Edwards just recently, and I think that's bearing on the market to some degree. I think the movement in the market on the price is reasonable. I think everything is reasonable except that I really like what Adesanya's, how he's handled the loss, the way he's reacted to it, the fact he wanted to come right back and get it back. He's kept himself relatively quiet all these months, and neither guy's going to learn a lot of new tricks in 4, 5, 6 months that they've been back at it. So it's going to be a fascinating fight. I just look for Adesanya to finish what he started the first time around.
You made mention of one fight that's not on the main card. That's Chris Curtis against Kelvin Gastelum. Gastelum had an incredible fight not that long ago against Israel Adesanya in a title contention bout there that Gastelum came up a little bit short. We've seen the numbers change on this fight here as we get closer and closer to fight night. You see Chris Curtis now is plus $1.05, Gastelum minus $1.25. What do you make of this line move, and how do you see this one playing out at middleweight?
Yeah, real big line move here where Curtis opened minus 165-ish. It looked odd to me at the time, which is why on the About Business podcast, we released Gastelum plus 135. I think that's a good position. I think where the price is now is representative of how I handicap this fight. Curtis is good, and he may have a slight advantage on the feet just with the slick boxing, but Curtis has been losing some fights, and he's been able to touch people and put people out, and he has a good resume recently, but I don't believe he's near the mixed martial artist that Gastelum is. And I don't care how many losses Gastelum's had recently. Look who he's been losing to. I think if Kelvin Gastelum comes back here and has any focus at all, and I'm counting on him having focus, that this is surely his fight to lose.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating to see how that line has really been on the move. The biggest money mover we've seen. I want to get your thoughts on another fight that I know, and I believe you've already released in the About Business podcast. That'd be Cynthia Calvillo. She's a rather big favorite here against Lupita Godinez. What do you make of Calvillo in this spot here as over a $2 betting favorite?
Actually,
Our dog, rather.
Yeah, Lupi Godinez is the big favorite here. And this is a fight at 115. Now, Calvillo's had troubles at 115, which is why she's been fighting at 125. But she has really put together a bunch of losses. She's tough as old leather. She's mean as a junkyard dog, and she's desperate. And I love what desperate fighters can do. Now, you're going to have to wait until the scales. Now, I didn't wait on the scales. At plus 260, Calvillo was mispriced, and I believe at plus 230, she's still mispriced. If she makes weight and enters this fight, she's going to be the larger girl, which will be unusual for her. She's mean. She has the same wrestling Godinez has. Godinez, yes, will be a little faster and may have a little advantage late, depending on the cut. But this is a mispriced fight. Calvillo is live. The over here is 2.5 rounds, shaded heavy over. I like Calvillo via decision here, and thanks for having me on, David.
As always, Lou, always enjoy the conversation. Calvillo, big price, but we've got the even better price, now down to plus 230. All right, always great. Check out the About Business podcast as well. Coming back with Jordan Sherwood next here on First Strike. DraftKings Sportsbook is giving you plenty of ways to bet on the UFC. Just download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. You're going to be able to bet on more than just the main event. DraftKings has great odds on fight lines, total rounds, and futures for all MMA events. Eligibility restrictions do apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for the full terms and conditions. We're rolling on this edition of First Strike here as we preview UFC 287. Always a pleasure each and every week to catch up with the King of Chicago. He is Jordan Sherwood. You can follow him at Wood on ESPN 1000. And of course, he is the host of the Unnamed MMA podcast, which I think is a great name. Jordan, great to have you back on, my friend. I do want to get, before we get your thoughts on the main event, a couple fights I know you already have plays on, and I want to get your thoughts on those fights that you've circled out. One is Kevin Holland, Big Mouth, back in there against Santiago Panzanibio. We know how tough Panzanibio can be, and yet he's a $2 betting underdog. What do you make of Big Mouth Kevin Holland here? You kind of feel like a guy who's talked about retirement. Is he still mentally in this as a betting favor of 245 right now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he is a big risk because you don't know what mentality-wise is Kevin Holland going to take this fight seriously? Did he take the fight camp seriously? Is he going to revert back to, utilizing his wrestling, utilizing his outstanding athleticism, or is he just going to show up, get a paycheck, and let Santiago Panzanibio kind of dictate? Look, I'm going to buy into the fact that Kevin Holland is still mentally there, is still one of the top-tier fighters that we have in the UFC, and it's almost a fade on Santiago Panzanibio. I don't think the guy's been the same, really, since he lost that long win streak after the long way off, and he got, lost and knocked out by the Leech. He was losing his last fight against Alex Morano, who took that fight on short notice off the couch at a catchweight fight until he was able to land something clean in the third round. I think it's a similar style matchup for Santiago Panzanibio, a guy that's going to pressure in Kevin Holland, a guy that's going to utilize his reach and kind of dirty the fight up. So that's why I think Kevin Holland is still a safe play, because I just think that Santiago Panzanibio is not the same fighter we once saw at the top of the welterweight division.
Very quickly, Jordan, when you're playing a big favorite like Holland is here at almost 250, do you put those in maybe a two-team or a two-fight parlay instead of having to lay that big exposure at 245? How do you approach that in the gambling market?
Well, obviously, I mean, if you're going to have somebody in a parlay, you're going to pick them straight up to win the fight. But yeah, obviously, yeah, There's a little bit of risk with Holland, as big of a money line that he is. So maybe you couple him with Raul Rosas Jr., who's opening up the card, and he's a big time favorite as well. Maybe you double up those, or if you like Gilbert Burns, I think he's another guy that certainly is that parlay stuffer. But you and I both know, Dave, like if you like a guy and you're going to put him into a parlay, you're basically saying, I'm putting my money straight up. He's going to win the fight. I just got to get that value down. And I certainly would recommend that with a particular fight in Kevin Holland, with him being such a big favorite.
Excellent advice out there, people. So maybe find some different ways there. But to Jordan's point, Dave, if you do like the fighter, even though they're a big fighter, maybe you pair them with somebody else that's over a $2 betting favorite, as you mentioned, Raul Rosas Jr. or Gilbert Burns, a really big favorite. We'll get to that fight in just a second. But let's talk about one of the prides of Boston. They got a pretty good fight factory up there with Rob Font against Adrian Yanez here. And, Font feels like Britton Hess, of course, does a great job producing this show. He calls it the tip of the spear. He's a tip of the spear guy, right? He's always fighting up there against the very best in this weight class. How about a guy like Yanez? This is a young fighter that the UFC likes. Is this a little bit too much too soon?
It could be. I mean, I think, this is a test really to understand where is Rob Font now. He's lost 2 fights in a row, both in, main event showcase fights. Some argued that, look, the Marlon Vera fight could have gone the other way, but Vera landed the more significant strikes and really put, Rob Font, I mean, his face after that fight looks like every prototypical Marlon Vera fight. The thing about, though, is that he still has one of the best jabs that we have, not just in the weight class, in the sport. His boxing is phenomenal. And now he's going back to a 3-round fight. He's not going to have to rely on cardio over a 5-round fight. And this is a dramatic step up in competition for Yanez, a guy that, throughout his career has struggled in some fights. You could argue earlier on in his career that he was losing the first round of Randy Costa before he righted the ship. Split decision over Davey Grant, a guy that causes a lot of issues for guys in the bantamweight class. So I think I like Rob Font as a dog, purely relying on his main event experience and his boxing and the resume, the strength of schedule, if you will. Yanez is going to bring the fight to him. Rob Font has seen it, and I think Yanez might be deer in headlights when he realizes, oh my God, this guy's jab, this guy's boxing is pretty pure. So I like Rob Font as the underdog in this fight. And
I do love the way you mentioned there, Jordan, that because Font's been fighting these main events in this 5-round fights, it looks like the war of attrition actually works against him in a 3-round fight. I'm right there with you. I think he's going to be really live for those 15 minutes of hell. That really could be a firefight here between Font and Yanez. And I'm with you at that plus price tag. It's pretty tempting for sure. Gilbert Burns is a massive favorite against Jorge Masvidal. We all understand why. But when you think of Jorge Masvidal in this spot and you go, he still has that one punch ability, will Gilbert Burns give him the chance and stand in front of him as almost a $5 betting favorite? Or do you think he ragdolls him for 3 potential rounds here and just does what Masvidal hates, and that is take me down to the ground and out wrestle me because it's not where I'm good?
Look, I didn't like this fight, booking. I mean, they're trying to sell it as a rivalry in Miami and whatnot. Good for them. They're in South Florida, and I'm not trying to, tell people don't order the pay-per-view because it should be a fantastic card, fantastic fight. But I wasn't anywhere near this fight betting it because Gilbert Burns is way too big of a favorite in my mind from a moneyland standpoint. And he has finished guys before, but traditionally he's not a finisher. He's a guy that's going to out grapple you and and control you. But now we're hearing the storylines, and I can confirm from multiple sources that the storylines are true, that Jorge Masvidal is considering retirement. And why not? I mean, who would ever thought he would have made the money that he did in this sport, even 30 fights into his career? He's got an opportunity to hang his gloves up in front of his hometown Miami fans. So, look, Gilbert Burns inside the distance is now the play. I think Jorge Masvidal's got future endeavors. He's got future plans. It doesn't include mixed martial arts. So I've got it from reliable sources. This is it for Masvidal. And if it is it for Masvidal, I see Gilbert Burns going out there and finishing him quite decisively.
That would denote breaking news here on First Strike. And by the way, in all seriousness, that is an angle. We've seen fighters when they have mentally checked out and are thinking about dropping those gloves in the center of the octagon and paying their respects. Jordan, that is something I've not heard. And that is very intriguing news to me because I looked at it the same way you did. I thought this was way too big a price tag on Gilbert Burns. I heard Gilbert Burns talk last week, and he talked about finishing Masvidal to really kind of get his name back out there in title contention. So if you've got one guy thinking about finishing and another guy who thinks he might be finished, boy, that's a very intriguing handicap. By the way, Gilbert Burns via DQ, TKO, or KO is plus 275. Via sub is plus 225. Is there one way or another? Or are you just like inside the distance to take care of? You don't have to figure out what the manner of victory is.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously you point to Burns' ability to submit guys, his grappling acumen. We have seen Masvidal, although be it was like an inverted triangle choke, one of the craziest submissions from I think Toby Amata back in the day in Bellator. So it's probably not likely. I think you're safe inside the distance. But I truly believe that Gilbert Burns also needs a win and needs an impressive win over a guy like Masvidal to get back into consideration in title fight. So that's what you do. You go on and you finish Jorge Masvidal.
Wow. That is certainly huge news bringing to the table this week, Jordan. Very quickly, you got about a minute and a half to go. Let's get your thoughts on the main event because, styles make fights. I don't know if this is a good stylistic matchup for Israel Adesanya. He wins the majority of the rounds, but he doesn't win the fights, whether it's in the UFC or outside against Alex Pereira. Will it be different this time? Can he grapple his way to a 5-round win?
I thought he was going to do it in the rematch, or if in the first fight, and he didn't. And when he did, Pereira got up, and the dude still carries that power, that nuke of a left hand, all the way in the 5 rounds. So. For me, I was early on Adesanya, but the more I look into it, it's like this could just be the one guy that is the kryptonite that you just can't get over. And it's still at plus money. Pereira hasn't really shown that he's got, some issues wrestling or standing striking. So I think you got to put faith in that he's going to retain the title, at least today on Tuesday.
Yeah, I've been torn on this one, but I always get back to styles making fights, and certain guys or women like Holly Holm was kind of looked at as the Ronda Rousey stopper. It's exactly what she did. Pereira's kind of brought in as the Israel Adesanya stopper. That's what he's kind of done. So I wonder if it'll be different. All right, very quickly, I can't let you go without asking about the pin. You've got the Bears pin on your lapel. So now that they've traded out of the number 1 spot, is Chicago okay? Nobody's burning the city down and jumping over cows or whatever happens.
No, I think it's a situation where look, if the Bears get even more offer for the number 9 pick, great, they're going to take it. I think they're satisfied at the quarterback position. They're going to take the best guy and just try and build up their team in the draft and maybe do what the Eagles did. Take a year or two and be in the Super Bowl in no time. Chicago's
happy. Jordan's happy. Nice looking pin there. There he is, everybody. Give him a follow on Twitter as I do at Wood on ESPN 1000. And great, interesting information about possibly the last fight ever for Jorge Masvidal. Wow. We go from Chicago to Boston next here in First Strike. We're going to catch up with Dan Vreeland next as we keep previewing UFC 287. Get everything you need to bet on baseball this season with 24/7 streaming, daily best bet emails, including advice, data, and strategy for only $9.99. Our experts are also getting ready for golf's first major of the year. My goodness, this week at Augusta. For this year's Masters Betting Guide, Wes Reynolds profiles every single player in the field, and Matt Humans tells his best bets. Sign up today to get full access to VSiN through the NFL Draft for only $9.99 at VSiN.com/subscribe. I'm telling you, Wes and Matt, they break down the Masters like no other. Breaking down this fight card like no other, of course, is our crew here at First Strike. Let's go up to Boston now to Dan Vreeland. It was great having Dan on the handle this weekend here, if you watch Matt Brown and myself. And Dan didn't have a great throat on Thursday. Is the voice back? I know you lost it going up to see the Red Sox in action this weekend.
Yeah, I would say it's about 90% back. We're almost there.
Check him out and give him a follow as I do on Twitter at Gumby Vreeland. Dan, I do have to ask you, Rob Moreno, Britton has to do a great job putting the show together to get us ready for the air. And I get a text from the guys this morning, and it's basically steam on a Chase Sherman fight. And I said, man, this is what I love. This is when I know these guys are invested in what we do. And you look at a guy like Chase Sherman, and he's a big underdog, and he's been a big underdog for a reason. This time against Carl Williams here. What do you make of Chase? He still keeps getting fights in the UFC, although he doesn't seem to always be that competitive in there. But he's one of those try-hard guys. Will he try hard enough to get Dan Vreeland to back him at plus 380?
Ooh, I first of all have to say that I'm really bummed out that we didn't wind up getting Chris Barnett in this fight, because I loved him as an underdog. Chase Sherman posted as like a negative 230 favorite in that fight. So the fact that we're not seeing a Chase Sherman as a favorite and getting to bet the underdog side, huge bummer. With that being said, no, I'm definitely not betting Chase Sherman, even at that huge plus number. The thing I'll say about Carl Williams is, first of all, he ought to be a light heavyweight. I liked him way better at light heavyweight, but up at heavyweight, his wrestling seems to play. It played against Jimmy Lawson when he was on the Contender Series. It played in his UFC debut. Did he look fantastic? Did he look like somebody we want to get really excited about? No, but he looked like somebody who could take care of Chase Sherman in the wrestling department, a guy who's had trouble in the wrestling department. And really the only time he's looked good in his last like 5 or 6 fights was when somebody forgot to wrestle him. So I think Carl Williams goes in with a smart game plan. He takes him down. And if you're looking for a way to bet this fight and to wind up with some, decent odds, because you don't want to bet Carl Williams at negative 500 or close to it. I actually like Carl Williams inside the distance, and I'm seeing him with a TKO. Depending on where you're looking, it can get pretty close to even or even onto the plus side a little bit. And I know that he didn't look like he was even close to finishing last time, but we've seen Chase Sherman, especially when he gets taken down, get tired, kind of give up. And I think that could be in play here against Carl Williams, who's really relentless on the mat.
Yeah, it's a great way to look at it there, Dan, because I'm with you. You probably don't want to get in the habit of laying these big type of numbers standing alone. Look for ways there, as Dan is alluding to, maybe with KO, TKO finish there and get that to either closer to even money or maybe even slight plus money there. GM3 is back on this card here and the prelims. It's always fun to watch Gerald Meerschaert fight. He's a dog to Joe Pyfer here. And right now, plus $1.65 is what I'm seeing. What do you make of Gerald? He's been profitable sometimes in this dog role.
Yeah, I actually usually really love Gerald Meerschaert in the dog role. I had him in that Mahmoud Muradov fight. He made me look real smart. But here's the problem. Joe Pyfer comes from that Renzo Gracie Philly team who has got fantastic wrestling. And really, if you look back, the only people who have given Gerald Meerschaert trouble in the UFC are people with solid boxing and knockout power and the wrestling defense to force him to stand. And I think that's just what Joe Pyfer is here, sadly, is that like he's just one of those guys. First of all, he hits like a truck. We saw that on Contender Series as well with that big knockout of Ozzy Diaz. And because he's got that wrestling background, because he trains with, Petrosky and Sean Brady and Patrick Brady from who's going to be on PFL this weekend, all of those guys have gotten his wrestling to a point where I don't think Gerald's going to get it to the ground. I think his best bet is to try to wear out Pyfer here, but I think he's going to wind up on the feet too long with Pyfer and wind up paying the price here.
All right, so maybe this might be one of those times, even though a popular fighter in that dog role, you want to stay away from GM3. Michelle Waterson, another very popular fighter that we've seen through the years here, as a dog here in her strawweight bout against Luiana Pinheiro. And right now, Waterson is plus $1.40. What do you make of the Karate Hottie? Does she have one last good kick left in her?
Man, usually I'm here, the one backing all the dogs. You know me. I like to find a dog or two on the prelims. This is another favorite spot that I really love. In fact, I love the number on Luana Pinheiro. And the reason is simple. She has looked so good with her judo takedown game, right? Negative 165. I can't believe it's that close to even, because if you look at the people who's beaten Michelle Waterson, historically, the people who've beaten Michelle Waterson are people who can take her down and people who can control her. We even saw Paige Van Zandt do that back in the day, and she couldn't do that to very many people. And now we're seeing Luana Pinheiro, somebody who took down Randa Marcos 5 times with that judo. And I just think it's going to be rinse and repeat here for Luana Pinheiro. I think she's going to take her down at will. I think the fact that Michelle Waterson is just, sort of so tough and difficult to submit, I think it's going to be hard for Luana Pinheiro to get the finish. But I do really think that Luana Pinheiro here by decision plus 110, I think it's a steal.
Yeah, that definitely. I'm right with you on that handicap. We'll get the number to go the distance. Minus 330 speaks to the toughness of both these ladies, but specifically Michelle Waterson here in a smaller dog role. I'm with you. I feel like Luiana should probably be a little bit of a bigger favorite there. So probably good value there, plus money there for a decision at plus $1.10. You got the action man Chris Curtis back in there against Kelvin Gastelum. We've talked about how this line move has really changed from Curtis being a favorite to now being the small dog at plus $1.05. Gastelum's one of those guys, almost beat Israel Adesanya, for the middleweight crown, and had weight issues from 170 to 185. Now he doesn't have to worry about it at 185 these days, but he's the younger fighter, if you can believe this. Gastelum by 4 years against Chris Curtis. What do you make of this line move? And you think it's the rightful line move?
I don't. I first of all, I love it because it's giving me Chris Curtis and the plus money. But I can't believe it's been moving this way, because for me, if you look at the type of people who have beaten Chris Curtis, or even the people who've survived Chris Curtis in the UFC, because I'm not even talking about beating him. People who have survived Chris Curtis are people who don't exchange with him, right? You got the Rodolfo Vieira fight, which he kind of chose not to exchange, stayed away from Rodolfo Vieira's wrestling and grappling. And then you got the Jack Hermanson fight. And apart from that, everybody who has fought Chris Curtis has gone to sleep. And it's because they exchange with him. He's got really heavy hands. As we know, knockout power is the last thing to go when you're aging. He's 35 years old, but the knockdown power is still there for Chris Curtis. And I know that we talk about Kelvin Gastelum being tough. I know we talk about him being durable, but is he durable enough to take a shot from one of these big guys? I'm not so sure. I love Chris Curtis being the one to do the damage here, even if he doesn't get the finish. And I think if you want to sprinkle in on the TKO line here, I think that's totally in play too.
And if you want Curtis by KO, TKO, DQ, plus 350 there. So again, for this fight, though, to go to distance, which is interesting, again, speaks to the toughness we just alluded to, minus $1.90. So kind of differing opinions there of how this fight will go, whether or not Curtis can get the job done. Gastelum, by the way, a 5-1 to get it done by KO, TKO, or DQ if this fight does stay standing. When you get to the main card, you look and you see a teenager on there, and Raul Rojas Jr., and you go, wow, the kid's arrived when you put him on a pay-per-view this quickly. We know he's got the requisite skills. Going up against Christian Rodriguez here, is this, even though as a $2 betting favorite, is this the right spot for a kid, I say affectionately, to be in on a main card where the lights get a little bit brighter?
I think it doesn't really faze him. I've talked to Raul Rosas Jr. a couple of times, and he's one of those guys who just seems like, until somebody beats him, and I think someday somebody will probably beat him and sort of surprise him at where he is in his career. I don't think he believes that anybody can beat him at this point. So I don't think the bright lights will bother him all that much. I will say, while I favor him in this fight, I do think he's going to probably beat Christian Rodriguez. I'm a little hesitant to pull that negative 225 line because, we talked about him in his first fight. He beat Jay Perrin, a guy who had trouble with the grappling defense, wound up on his back a couple of times, and wound up getting submitted. I think that's totally in play here too. But Christian Rodriguez, just more athletic, younger, quicker, faster than somebody like Jay Perrin. It's an interesting step up for Raul Rosas Jr. and one that I'm probably staying away at over negative $2. So, but at the same time, I think Raul Rosas Jr. not going to be fazed by the bright light.
I can't believe Rodriguez is the old man at 25, 7 years the senior of the 18-year-old. I do got to get your thoughts here, Dan, on the main event here. When you look at Izzy, if you want to be the greatest middleweight of all time, you got to beat the guy that really in any organization you haven't been able to beat as of yet. That's Alex Pereira. What do you make of it? Because the numbers have come down on the champion, Pereira, who was still the betting underdog when this fight opened.
Yeah, I'm still going to go with Israel Adesanya. I'm one of those people who, when I've seen that many rounds of them fighting together and it seemed like the fighter had a clear advantage, yeah, the knockout bums me out. And yeah, I'm worried about it again. Who wouldn't be worried about it again? It's happened 2 times in a row if you count the kickboxing match too. But the fact of the matter is Izzy seemed to be winning that fight pretty easily. He was working in all the different angles and stuff like that. I think we see enough of that too. Maybe a little clinch work to keep it safer at the end.
Dan, good to hear you got your voice back from that Red Sox game this weekend. Always enjoy having you on, my friend, and enjoy UFC 287. When we come back, we're going up to Washington, D.C. with Reed Kuhn next here on First Strike. Back here on First Strike on VSiN. Dave Ross here in Las Vegas. We always love going back to Washington, D.C. to catch up with Reed Kuhn and his fine numbers. Of course, you can follow him on Twitter as I do, at Fightnomics, the author of a book of the same title. And throughout this show today, Reed, we've been using your fight data to really help break down these fights. So when you see these graphics coming up here, great job by our production team here at VSiN, but also Reed Kuhn, to you, sir, for some of that fight data, just with the check marks of which fighter comes off on the right side or the better side of the equation. And let's just start right there, how you compile that data, Reed, and how it goes into forming your decisions on a week-in, week-out basis.
Yeah, I call it the Uber tail of the tape because I think it's very traditional to have basic boxing metrics in MMA where you're looking at where they're from, the height, the reach. In some cases, you might get stance or record. But this was a challenge back, it was about 10 years ago this week, I think. I was in Montreal, and a MMA host challenged me and said, well, if you could add numbers to that screen, what would you put on there? And I went home and created my own little cheat sheet. So it started as just something that I used, a crutch, and then I started sharing it. And so now I'll post select fights, and sometimes you'll see it out there, like in work at VSiN. So it's out there now. I usually have to clarify what it means, but I think they're helpful in describing what the tendencies of each fighter really are.
You know, if I got that challenge many moons ago, I don't know what I would have done with it. You take the challenge, become an author, and then still use this data today. It is absolutely fascinating, Reed, and it certainly is helpful to try to find our way to the winner's circle. Let's start off right there in the main event with Alex Pereira here against Israel Adesanya, and we just threw up some of the data that you've compiled on this fight here. Look, you've got a lot of data between these two guys, not just the bigger sample of what they've done in their entire careers. Do you throw out some of the data that is not directly correlated to their fights, whether it was in the UFC or not? Or do you just look at when these two guys have fought, let me just take and compile that data?
Well, in this case, we're looking at UFC only fight performance. And so each guy has their career to date. Now, Pereira is a little bit fresher. He's newer in the UFC, so fight minutes, not as much to go on. And you often see this, like some of his stats look abnormally good. Like his power head accuracy is ridiculous at 48%. Average should be somewhere in the upper 20s. So on one hand, Adesanya is good. Pereira looks amazing on paper, but sample size means a lot. Adesanya has done that for 5-round fights with the best of the best for a long period of time. He's been in, 10 title fights or something crazy at this point. So Pereira is still coming off. He only has 4 appearances. And so is that number as believable? Probably not. So we'll see some regression to the mean there, but it still points out why he has been successful. He has been successful because, one, he hits hard, but he is extremely accurate and efficient in finding his target. And Adesanya normally has been very hard to hit, and that's what makes him so dangerous. He's rangy. In this case, he's not going to be as rangy, doesn't have much of an advantage. But Adesanya can fight going backwards. He can make you reach for those shots and then make you pay for it with his counter strikes. And that's what we see in the data. That's what he's good at. And when he's wielding that strategy, he's winning rounds. And he won 3 out of 5 rounds in that last fight against Pereira. And he even used ground control, which we have not seen historically that he uses. He actually did more takedown attempts in that fight than his entire UFC career to date. So is that a new weapon that he's working on? Is he realizing that maybe Pereira is too strong on the feet and he's got to switch it up? So strategy is going to be interesting in this rematch, but just based on pure numbers, I am still leaning towards Adesanya. And I found that a little bit surprising, but he does have the experience.
You know, Reed, one of the thing in the data that you've compiled here, and I want to bring it back up, is this distance knockdown difference or chin, if you will, right? And it's basically a wash here at 100%. And I think the common theory is that Adesanya's chin doesn't hold up as well as Pereira's, but really it's kind of a wash by your metrics, correct?
Yeah, that's because that stoppage, he never went down. It's like that old Raging Bull movie. You didn't knock me down. He may have beat him up pretty bad against the fence, and the referee definitely stopped it, but he didn't knock him down. So Adesanya has not been officially dropped. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have a TKO stoppage or get knocked out on the ground, but that metric is a very specific one that is tracked by the UFC stat keepers. And so both of these guys have scored knockdowns. They actually, Adesanya has technically scored them at a slightly higher rate on a per strike landed basis. But in terms of the chin, they're both clean. Neither one of them has been dropped in competition in the UFC.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating data right there. Let's get to the co-main event of the evening here. Gilbert Burns is a guy that I think feels like he needs to have not just a win against Jorge Masvidal, but a really showy, impressive win, if you will, to put himself right back and vault him back into title contention here at 170 pounds against a guy. Jordan Sherwood was on the program earlier. Reed alluded to the fact he thinks he's hearing on good sources this might be it for Masvidal. And, at 38 years of age, but Burns is a no spring chicken in 36. You got a lot of data on these guys. Should Burns be as big a favorite as he is?
Well, I like grapplers, and this is a mismatch on the ground. I mean, Burns is nasty on the mat. The thing is that he sometimes allows himself to get drawn into a firefight. And when he does that, he pays the price. So if you look at how many times he's been knocked down, it's more than the times he's dropped his opponent. So that knockdown ratio is not a good one for him versus Jorge Masvidal, who is a nasty striker. And yes, at this point in his career, he's also been knocked down a few times. You fight that long, it's going to happen. But you got to think that if they go toe-to-toe on the feet, Masvidal does have the advantage both in the striking accuracy as well as the knockdown power. He's just more accustomed to being in that type of fight. I don't think Burns wants to leave it there. And that's what makes Masvidal's strategy a vulnerability, because if he gets aggressive with his stand-up, Burns is going to change levels, put it on the mat, and that is going to be a game changer for this fight. In 3 rounds, I think Burns could make short work of it if he gets it to the ground. And that nugget about Masvidal maybe retiring, I mean, that's a red flag for me. When I see guys already 1 foot out the door, they are not putting in the same work in the gym as they were when they were young and hungry and looking for something bigger. This is time to cash out for Masvidal. That gives me even more confidence in Burns.
Absolutely fascinating. Looking at the numbers here, a lot of check marks in the positive side for Jorge Masvidal, but that big X might be the fact that if this is in fact the end, we've seen it numerous times. Fighters, as you mentioned, kind of already have checked out mentally a little bit. I think you could ask those questions about Kelvin Gastelum in the past. Mentally, where is he? Fluctuating in weight, now back up at 185 pounds against Chris Curtis in a very interesting fight, and certainly line move here, where now Gastelum is over $1 bet, minus $1.25 betting favorite, whereas this fight opened with Curtis, the sizable favorite. And that's all the way flipped. Did the numbers back a flip for you, or do you think they had it right the first time?
I think they back up the flip here. And this is a weird one because we have wildly different sample size here. We have Gastelum, who has been in the game for a long time, all the way back to being an Ultimate Fighter reality show winner. Then you have Curtis, who has very minimal fights to date. Now, he has looked great, and he has, again, like Pereira, put up some crazy numbers, but it's easy to do that over a short period of time. It's a lot harder to do that over a long career. Gastelum is one of the first guys to make Israel Adesanya look mortal in the ring in a 5-rounder. He actually went the distance with him. And so Gastelum, while weathered for a younger guy, this is actually a nice matchup for him, actually facing someone older than he is, but also less experienced, because Gastelum has a huge experience advantage, and yet he's the younger guy. Weird situation. You don't normally see that. But what I'm interested in is whether or not Gastelum gets us to the ground. So if you look at the perfect takedown defense of Chris Curtis, arguably those numbers are severely inflated, because Rodolfo Vieira went 0 for 20 on takedown attempts against Chris Curtis in a 15-minute fight. That is kind of absurd, but that's a grappling specialist who couldn't set up the wrestling, couldn't use his striking. So Chris Curtis, is his takedown defense really that good? If you go to the UFC.com page, there he is. There's his picture, top of the heap, #1 all time in takedown defense. I don't know if I believe that. I think we are going to see that tested here. And if they do stand there and duke it out on the hands with their hands, I think Gastelum can at least hold his own. He's held his own against very good elite champion caliber strikers. And Chris Curtis remains to be seen how good he really is. But personally, I think some of the stats are inflated.
Only have about 45 seconds to go. Just quickly, your thoughts on Big Mouth Kevin Holland back in there. Speaking of where is his head, when his head is right, he's elite. When it's not, you kind of question. We know Panzanibio is going to be there, a try-hard guy here over $2 betting underdog. What are the numbers showing you?
A lot of advantages, a lot of check marks over on Kevin Holland's side. He is going to be huge compared to Panzanibio. He has striking advantages. He is very accurate and sharp with his hands. Yes, Panzanibio is a scary guy by his own right, but he's going to be fighting uphill, and he is much older than Kevin Holland. I think this is a great matchup for Kevin Holland. He's a deserving favorite here. He has that backup plan with slick chokes because he has such long arms. He's like John Jones of the welterweight division. So I like a lot of advantages here. I'm going with Holland.
The uber tail of the tape. We need to make that mainstream for years to come here in the UFC. Great info as always. Appreciate Reed and Dan Vreeland, Jordan Sherwood, and Lou Finocchiaro. Enjoy the fights. We'll see you next week right here on First Strike.